So the other day I noticed that I got a lot of sunglasses. I started going through my drawers and started realizing that I'm starting to clutter all my sunglasses in the drawer. And I started thinking, well, I got a 3D printer. So let's see if I can make a sunglass rack on the 3D printer. I'm going to show in this video a little bit of using ZBrush. It's a little different than using like 3D Max or something else outside of the box or Blender. I just wanted to go through ZBrush because I felt like my modeling skills, or not modeling skills, but box modeling skills need to be improved in there a little bit. So I did make one rack and it fit the shorter sunglasses, but my Oakley's a little bit different. They actually were too long on the side, and that's something that I should have probably measured, but I didn't have the Oakleys around, and every other sunglasses fit on the rack that I made the first one. But the second day that I printed on the other version, the extended version, it was cold, and so I noticed that filament started warping because it was so cold and it was trying to print. The temperature dropped in that room, and where this side near the window was, it started coming off the bed. But I didn't want to toss it because it took so long to print, and I kept it, and I'm going to see if it still works. But it does hold my Oakleys, so these work on top of that. It's a little rough. I might paint this, that way it just kind of gives it a little bit cleaner feeling, and sand it down, just kind of polish it off a little bit. But for what I needed to get these glasses out of my drawer. Can't even talk, it's so cold this morning. I want to kind of get them on the wall and just kind of mount them somewhere so it's not so cluttered, getting scratched as they're doing it, and I can have somewhere safe to put them. I want to show you on the computer or my edit, because it's going to be an edited down version of what I did, and you're going to see the back and forth and the kind of thinking process of how do you go about doing something like this. Because what I did was just get a template or a stencil and kind of blocked it out, and you'll see on this video where I go with it. Hopefully it's informative, hopefully it helps. So let's jump into the computer, let me show you the edits, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the star, it looks like, and this is a sped up play-by-play of the video. What I found online was a template for sunglasses, and it helps because you can see the millimeters and the scale. So what I'm going to do is use that star to do the shadow box, and this is an older technique that kind of came back to, and all I want to do is just really get like a template for the sunglasses. This will actually help me to understand how big I need a model around the sunglasses for when I print, so I actually get a good scale with it. The difference being what I mentioned earlier is that my Oakleys push back a little bit further and they're a little bit thicker. So these are like your standard sunglasses that you'd buy at the store, and they usually fit on most racks. But the Oakleys seem to be a little bit more aerodynamic and bent out a little bit more than usual. But the other sunglasses I have seem to fit fine and perfectly on that little rack. And really this isn't anything fancy. All I got to do is just mainly just get a shape and kind of scale it down to what I need, and kind of eyeballing it. I do a little smoothing on the model, on the mesh, kind of clean it up, do some Z-remesh. That way it's not so heavy in polygons for no reason, because really all I want is just this for a reference for scale. I feel like doing this in ZBrush was something to get a little bit better in box modeling. Your standard modeling programs, this is a little bit easier, a little more straightforward, but having used ZBrush and getting a little more comfortable, it's something I want to improve my skills on. I could have done this model in 3D Max and it would probably been half the time, but that's okay. Well, I say that, except for this shadow box, I don't think there would have been a substitute for that, so it probably would have evened out on this amount of time spent. Because you can see right here, I've got sunglasses just blocked in real rough, and they can be polished, cleaned up, or remodeled, or anything like that. And for my use, this is actually really, quick and easy. Looking to kind of clean it up a little bit, just to kind of, I don't know, it's just me, because sometimes I just want to like polish the model off. I'm like, let me see if I can make it a little bit more cleaner. And it really doesn't matter, because I don't use this to print anything, from this. It's just for reference. And for me, I gotta go that route sometimes. Going in here and see what we're looking for. I think what I want to do is refine this model as I go along, because the ones that I printed work for now, but I'm probably gonna go back and refine the final model in the end again one more time, like third time. It's never finished, right? Using the transpose here, and the transpose is something that I use for getting scale and to kind of tell me how many meters or millimeters something is. The Scale Master helps kind of get an understanding, or getting how big something is. And so I use this to scale to the dimensions that I needed it to be, because I knew it needed to be like so many millimeters high and so many wide, and that's what I'm getting here. That's why you see me going back and forth with the website, kind of. And that transparency thing is something at the top. If you look at the top of ZBrush, you can see through it, and so that's something else that another program usually doesn't have. You'd have to import the image or put it on something and go from there. ZBrush, you can just make it transparent and use whatever's in your background, and not have to stop what you're doing to download, to copy, to reapply. That's so much of a hassle when you can just make your program transparent and see what you need to see. So I'm getting the scale, and the scale is what comes down to and what matters. I'm kind of playing around with maybe if this is gonna be bigger or smaller, but then again, if the model's accurate to the dimensions provided, it shouldn't be that big difference. So I left it alone. So I get a 1x1 cube right here, and it's pretty much what this whole model starts. The rack is going to be is from this cube. This isn't anything like fancy with sculpting or anything like that, but it does show how do I get something from a computer to a 3D printer and how to get that process made. So the first thing is to get a reference, get the scale, get your dimensions down so you know what you're working with, and that always helps, because you can measure it from pictures and probably put it in there too, but this seemed to work. That's one way of doing it. So you can see that I'm scaling it to the dimensions, the millimeter. And what I really wanted was just something to, I didn't even sculpt on this. It's not even fancy. It's just a really basic model. But when you break it down, you're like, man, this is actually kind of tricky to get this to work. So this is something that I needed to figure out. How far do you go to make the sunglasses set and not be awkward? Because most likely it's going to lean back or not be straight on the way it is. You see most racks. And it probably would have been easier in the printer if I had made it straight, so that it didn't have to do an angle and do supports, because on the second print it actually broke off and it didn't finish one of the ends on it, and so that it wasn't supported too well. I'm kind of playing with a little more angles in ZBrush, because I love that you can push and pull polygons and go back and forth and actually not have to go in and close a hole, delete a gap, and then it's a different process. Real fluid. So playing with ideas, kind of getting a look, trying to figure out where I want it to expand, where I want it to be. Do I want the back plate to be its own mesh and just bullying it all together in the end? And what I end up doing is doing an array mesh, and that kind of helps to keep the model simple, so that I'm not having to how do you say it, copy paste or duplicate and try to make different variations. And so this is where the array mesh kind of comes into play. I know I want 4. I don't want, the printer can only fit so many, and I'm factoring about 4 on the plate, and I'd like for it to actually, you know, be able to be print again and not in pieces. And I could always stack them on each other if I really needed more if I buy more sunglasses, then yeah, maybe I might need to revise what I'm doing here and make a bigger rack for my sunglasses. But for my use, or for what I needed, or for even my curiosity of, can I do this? Can I make this? And it did work. It did print out in the end. Getting used to the tools for the Z modeler is something that you get as you use it more and more, and that's probably a good way. You get more familiar with where things are. I always reference things in 3D programs like a kitchen. You know, you always have your, you know, your forks, knives, and spoons, and sometimes they put them in a different drawer. There's a different place or different area, and so you got to figure out the layout of the kitchen. Once you get familiar with your kitchen, you can cook anything you want. And that's where I'm doing, or what I'm doing here is just getting used to Z modeler. I'm comfortable with it, but I want to be a little bit more comfortable than I am now. I want to add a little bit to that and up that skill level slightly, because I actually like what ZBrush is doing in their outside of the box of thinking of modeling. They're not following other programs and doing what you've always seen. They've kind of always stepped outside of that box. Even with their user interface has always been different, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with something a little different, a little bit unique, and not normal to other programs. So this model pretty much just has a back plate and the little nose plates, and that's it. But the tricky part is to make the sunglasses fit, and as I printed it, I was like, awesome, it printed fine the first time, but those Oakleys didn't fit. But they do fit the other sunglasses that are your more standard, and so I kept that one too. So either way, I still kind of had a good result, and I'm happy with what was printed. Right here I'm using the transpose line to kind of get the scale again, to make sure everything's right. I used the Scale Master, and I only did it on the Z, and it flattened everything, so I'm like, oh. And I had to go back and undo each piece from that. And that's okay. These little hiccups are something that you're going to probably encounter too if you ever do any 3D prints. You're like, oh, push that. You can always undo it. There's an undo button somewhere, or some way to fix it. So we're going in here. Oh, but also on top of that, don't forget to save. It's a big factor. And there I go. I save. Speaking of saving, after, you know, whenever you do something in any program and something weird happens, that back of your brain kicks in and says, hey, you need to save. I've always found it funny in some programs where a button that you use forever stops working and doesn't kick in until, you know, like later on. You're like, oh man, that button stopped working. And once you feel that change, you need to save, because something is not right. And most often it'll either crash or not work the whole time. You just need to restart your program. But those are always good or not good signs, but signs of like, hey, save your stuff, save your work. So I like this. The array mesh actually copies all the changes that I do to one to all the others, and that kind of helps me on having to reapply it again and copy and paste. something like this comes in handy, and it's always good to use. So now you can kind of see the basic setup for it. It's not really rounded off on there, and so I'll try to pull it up and down a little bit so the sunglasses have something to set on. But what I found out is that it probably was better off to leave it flat. It's really the back end where the little ear part comes into play that the sunglasses need to set flat, because anything right there kind of makes it wonky, and I realized that on my first print. So you learn as you go. These are parts of doing something where you want to create, and you realize that, oh, that didn't work at all. So I'm using the dynamic to kind of give a little smooth edges to it. I didn't want it to be so hard whenever it print, like hard edges and everything else. I wanted the sunglasses to kind of set on a little bit smoother edge when it printed. Being so cold the second time I printed this, a lot of the edges kind of got a little rough, because it's heating up the filament as the room is colder and it's cooling it down. So as you know, anything that gets hot and cold is going to expand and contract, and it'll change its properties of the material a lot quicker than it should. You kind of want that to settle into itself, which I'm learning. It's a little bit back and forth of okay, this environment needs to be set up just right, you know, the right environment. As I change the sunglasses, the array kind of sets its distance based on, I guess, it's center to center. And so if I scale it, then I have to reapply the array. But no complaints, it's still a badass tool to have inside of a program, or any program. Most programs do have an array, and I love just working with one mesh and then it copies it to everything else. And so, as you can see, I'm still getting familiar with where things, or where tools are that I need to grab and push and pull. And to me, this is a fun process. It's fun to like learn and also be like, oh, that's cool, that okay, I can see a use for this being down the road for that, doing this here and there. And yeah, I can't complain. I always love working in ZBrush. It's fun learning and fun kind of advancing in it. And this whole year they've been upgrading and updating and adding cloth and everything else, and you're just like, oh man, this is a lot of fun stuff to learn, and also include in new models and techniques. That yeah, it's just fun. It keeps it interesting. There's always room to grow and learn. Every year I think I get caught up with learning ZBrush, and it's just like, wow, there's a few more tools, and then just going from there. So I'm trying to get the scale, trying to get a good depth. And what I did, I purchased an electronic digital little ruler, and it's got like a little digital end on it, and that it actually is pretty accurate, and I use that for how much scale I need to do. Helps out a lot. So I'm trying to get a look for this, and I'm getting pretty happy with the result of what I'm getting. So another thing that I had to kind of look at, ZBrush doesn't have, unless you download a brush set that has for screws. So what I had to do is go to Thingiverse and find an older model that had a cutout for a screw that worked for another project. And all I did was grab that inner wall, brought it into ZBrush, made a brush out of it, and capped off the ends, and now I have a boolean for that. And then you'll see here that I actually bring it in. It's like a little screw piece, but I use it to boolean out for my screw cutout. And this, I can use this from here on out. This can always be used, and having this little piece will help me get screws in these 3D prints that I make. You can always go back and refine it and adjust it. So I scale it to be a little longer. I also needed it to keep the scale, because whatever I grabbed this from, it was the right scale. But for some reason, it was masked off when I created it, or saved it. So it wasn't moving correctly in this area of the video. So I'll put it on center, push it in just enough to be a cut above, and I'm boolean it out. And there you go. You got a screw opening, and pretty easy. My second print, since it got cold in the area, I'm gonna have to cut out some of the filament that didn't set right. The other side is perfect, but the side that was near the window, it deformed quite a bit, and I'll probably have to do a little cleanup on it. And like I said, I didn't want to toss the model because it took about 8 hours to print, and since I knew it was going to be cold, I set the settings even slower, so it probably took about 10 hours to print, given how the temperature was changing in that room. So there you have it. You have version 1 of my sunglass rack, and kind of getting a look at it, getting a feel for what I want. A lot of it I start trimming down because I start realizing, do I really need that little bottom lip on the nose piece to use extra filament, or do I want to save that? Because later on I could probably make a little more detail to this and sculpt in some details. But the only reason, I guess, for this one, I needed it for a practical use. I actually need this for my sunglasses. I don't need it, but it would help, I guess, is a better way to put it. So you can see I meshed it all together. And for some reason, the Scale Master, or when I booleaned it, it came in at a different scale. So it's either bigger or smaller. Something happened different, because when I brought in the sunglasses just to check, I started checking with the tools. Something was off. But what happened was, when I reset ZBrush, it started working again. When I booleaned it, it didn't have this issue. But for whatever reason, it did it on this. And so what I did, so right here I'm measuring. I'm like, all right, this is this big, this is that big. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just throw these sunglasses with the boolean just to see what happened. And something did happen. But what I did was use a Scale Master in the end for this version, and got the height, and I just copied that height to the other one and applied it, because it was really going to be the same. The next version, it doesn't do this. I don't know why I did it in this one, but I just had like some memory or leftover. But for here, I'm kind of adjusting. And I'm always going back. You're always going to refine something, I guess, as you look at it more. You're like, I want to fix this. I want to go fix that. Because before you print it, you got to wait. And then when you wait, you're like, oh, and it's like waiting for Christmas or something. You're like, I want to open the gifts now. You got to wait. You got to let it do its thing. If you rush it, then more likely you'll get error. And if you're patient, it'll usually come out a lot cleaner. And so, saving. Always save your work. So now I do a Boolean mesh with the dynamic subdivision turned on, because I do have dynamic on the little pieces that stick out. And right here I'm measuring it, and I do the scale master, and something isn't adding up. I go back and forth trying to figure out what's going on here. This is that big. Is this right? And then I'm thinking like maybe the transpose tool is angled or something. I'm checking the reference, saying this is so many millimeters for the sunglasses. Trying to make sure it's not angled. Even if it was angled, I still just need a general close estimate. So I bring them in, and I'm like, where'd they go? Because if they were the same scale, they wouldn't have moved. And I find out that it all moved. There might be an answer to it. Maybe I did something with the pivot. Maybe something moved around differently, but it didn't do it the second time. And as I put the sunglasses on here, you can see they're huge, or the thing is small. So what happened? So how do we fix this? So go to Scale Master, get in the scale. That's my scale. I know it to be from the other one. Measuring it again. That's saying measure twice, cut once. Well, I'm measuring like 100 times. Making sure everything's right. All right, this is a scale. Nothing got weird here. So what happened? Let's turn this off, because that's the only thing that I exported in the Boolean. And I tried again, and the same thing happens. I export it out as a combined mesh. But I check the scale here, and I check the scale here. So what I ended up doing is getting the height, writing it down somewhere on a notepad, and going from there, and then just reapplying it. And that worked for this problem. It didn't happen on the second time, like I said, but if you run into this issue, it probably would be good to do the 1x1 square in the original and then bring that in. That way you have a template to go by, or a scale. And I eventually do put a cube in here, just after learning. You learn as you go. And that's all a lot of this was a good learning process, on top of trying to figure out an easy way to do this. It's not a complicated model. It's real basic, real straightforward, and it's something that probably anybody can try on any other program. That's not going to throw you through a lot of hurdles to try to get it done, because if I do a sculpt and there's an error with some kind of fold that's inside of something else, you have to find out where that error is, and leads to more problems. But I'm starting simple, and I wanted to share this video to kind of show how a simple model can go to a 3D printer. So right here, I was trying to copy this and paste it in the other. For whatever reason, it didn't want to copy paste, so Notepad to the rescue. And I go back to the Boolean, type it in here, and then reapply it, and so that it could scale it to what I need, and then bring the sunglasses back in. Does it fit? It looks like it worked. So, well, I say that I think I do something a little bit off. These sunglasses are different. Hopefully you learn from my mistakes, because it was a little bit back and forth. And that's what these videos, I hope, help too, because nothing's gonna go perfect in any model that you create or anything that you do. There's always gonna be some little curveball, and it's those little hurdles and little problems that you figure out how to solve that make you a little more well-rounded in the end. And they're not so much a hurdle when you encounter them later on a real project or a real deadline, where you're like, gosh, what do I do to fix this? Well, you've already done this a few times, and you already know how to fix it. So it's not so much of a like, what do I do? You already know what to do. You just go back and fix it. So sometimes these need to happen. These are okay to me. And the fun thing about problem solving is when you answer the problem, you're like, you feel better about it. You know that, you accomplished the little challenges that came before you. So I'm exporting this out as an STL, and I'm going to jump into another program that is my, I guess you call them, what do you call them? I guess you can call them a slicer programs, or they're your 3D print programs that you use to put supports on. Because whenever you export these out, the printer needs to know if you need supports and other things, and that's not something that ZBrush does. So I go into Ultimaker or Cura, and this is what I end up using for my 3D printer. And this gives you kind of an understanding that that's my print bed, that little box at the bottom. It doesn't fit. Most of the time I do want it to be straight up and down, but for whatever, this model is a little too big and I have to angle it. It kind of prints on uncharted territory on the print bed because I've never printed in that area. So if I didn't level it right, then that area is going to be a little bit off. Plus with the cold, it kind of added an extra factor. So I make a support for it and see if this works. It didn't need supports because the angle wasn't big enough. And that's what I liked about this one. This one didn't need any supports. The other one, it needed supports, and actually one of the pieces kind of like didn't print accurately, and so I had to super glue it back and I had to nurse it back to health. I was like, I'm not gonna let you I'm not gonna let you go, little guy. I'm gonna fix you. I'm gonna make you better. So that's part of what the process is. You gotta go back and forth. One of my dogs hear somebody outside. What you hear, barking. As you can see here, I'm playing with settings. I'm trying to figure out the density and get things right. With this program, it does a lot for you, and it's never really done me wrong. It's always done pretty good as far as supports and everything else. It's never been a challenge to figure out how to get things into the printer. I'm looking at how much infill it needs and how much I want to give it or take away, because using more filament means more money in the end, I guess, if you really come down to it. And if you want to make it cheaper, you can use less density. And for my needs, I just needed to just be enough to hold the sunglasses and not really have to be so dense. Right here, I use a different kind of infill. I always love seeing, I don't know what it's called. I forget the name of it. It's kind of a wavy pattern for the infill. Sometimes I go with that. Sometimes I go with the straight line or back and forth. I'm always curious of what the infill, if it's 30 or feels better or not. What's the science behind it? I don't know, but I always like playing with those settings. So as I look at the model, I realized that, like, do I really need these pieces? Do I need this put in there just like that? This model right here is after I go back and print what I have. So this is the refined version. So now this version goes into whenever I did the Oakley's rack. And I almost wish I didn't go as far as I did, but I could still pull it back in version 3, right? My last version of this print. So as that Cura program ended, I went and printed it, and that's what you saw at the beginning of the video. And this is my revised version, because looking at it, I didn't want it too flat, I didn't want it too round, but I want to go back and forth with that feeling. I needed a lip at the end so they don't slide off. But after my second print, I realized that I put this angle a little too high. You can see that I kind of refined the model because I don't want to waste any more filament. And after that first print, it took a long time. So I wanted to kind of speed up this second process. I was like, I want to see these now because I don't want to wait and find out that it didn't work. Trial and error. You can see the little boolean cut out right there at the bottom. I don't have the boolean turned on, but I do eventually turn it on because I do need that. The back part, I had the lip, and that made the sunglasses not set flat onto the little sunglass rack, and so I eliminate that and I push the roundness into the front of the beak, this part. So you can see I went real simple with this one. I didn't try to do any complicated overhangs, and I probably should have did a few just for a little extra support, but it ended up printing out and it worked for now. And who knows, I might do another video and revise it and share that with you. So I learned exporting this out and getting the scale. And I think on this version that when I do the boolean, it doesn't do the scale off. It actually keeps the scale, and I'm like, oh, cool. So, but it does help to check. It's something that you should always check your scale, because it wouldn't be very good to go and print. That's what I learned when I first started printing. I tried to make a diffuser for one of my camera flashes, and I was like, I can do this, and I did it, but some reason here and there it got scaled too big, and realizing what had happened here in ZBrush might have been the same issue, or it might have been on my end. Who knows? But either way, you should check, because when you print it and you get it, you're like, oh, it's a lot of time to wait. You'll learn eventually to not just rush it. You gotta take the time to measure. So saving, always saving. That's probably the biggest lesson to always learn in life. Save your stuff. So here I exported both, I believe, the sunglasses and the thing, and I did a cube, because I'm like, this isn't gonna happen again. I'm not gonna go through this. So I detached the cube just so I can get the scale, and you can check the scale here, and it says actually what I needed. I'm like, okay, let me go to the other model, and it's that cube helps if you don't want to have to measure from the model, and just throw in a cube. Make it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. Check the cube here, check the size, check in the models, and this is where I'm just like, oh, it worked. Well, let's export it. STL. The other thing is use that print master, I think it's called. It's inside of ZBrush. That'll tell you if your mesh is a solid mesh. If you get any errors, it says if it's not solid, then there's something wrong with your model. And that'll you sometimes encounter when you do more sculpting. And for this model, I didn't do a lot of sculpting. I did it real basic. So you can see this version is a little bit taller, a little more refined, and it's going to take a lot longer because it has to go to each individual piece that's sticking up. Getting it on the bed to actually make it fit. I'm trying to see if I can go corner to corner to kind of keep it from going back and forth, because the printer probably likes it better to do that. But for this is what I end up with. And as you can see, I go through the settings a little bit, just kind of refine it. Nothing fancy. Whatever program you have, if you have a 3D printer, you'll realize that the printer will do a lot. Either a infill or whatnot. You can see this one needs supports, and it puts supports. I can change that angle to have more support angle, and I probably should have did that, and I didn't, because I was in a hurry. And that's the lesson here. Patience usually helps a lot. So that's most of this part of the video, where you see the process, what I did. getting a reference, bringing it in, putting in the ZBrush, exporting it out, putting it in your, your slicer or whatever they call them program, and going from there. And so a lot of this is just playing around with different supports, settings, and stuff like that. Some of them come off a lot easier if you do different ones, but I just go back and forth with the default. Well, whatever was suggested, because I'm doing this on a Anycubic Mega Zero 3D printer. So there you go. And that's it. That's the end of this section. So that's most of the segment for creating the sunglass rack. I ended up putting it on the wall. I stacked them on top of each other, and then I got sunglasses on there, and it works. So I was pretty happy. Little few minor adjustments that I see I want to make, but that's later on down the road. The purpose now, it got them out of my, the junk drawer or my drawer, kept them from getting scratched and making clutter in there. So that was the main point of the exercise, and to have something useful that I can print. And I wanted to share that with everybody too, to see the little hurdles that you encounter, the back and forth, the scale, the issues, trying to get it to work, and back and forth. So hope you enjoyed this video. Click like if you like it, or subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Hope to do some more later on down the road and in the future. So thanks again for watching.